Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Chewing the Fat with myself and Dean Kilby, as always, or as usual anyway. Hope you like the new fandangled intro we've put to it, and stay tuned for the highly produced outro to the show at the end. Had a lot of fun doing it.
People will watch to the end just to see that.
Just to see the
Fast forward, you don't need to listen to us.
Nothing to hear here, just to keep fast forward until the end. It's brilliant.
Look at you getting all artsy with the videos.
Yeah. It's like, the Little Britain where they do the Terry from Minder when he's in the little shrimp dude. I wrote the theme show. I played the music on the theme show.
We're gonna have to create a couple of cartoon characters.
There's an app for that, isn't there? Can't we just turn ourselves into cartoon characters?
Dean and Birdman.
All right. So this week, just to appease some of the people that tune into this little chat, we're going to be talking about the effects and how the protocol works with people that have diabetes or thyroid problems, and also female-specific issues like PCOS, which I have no idea what that means. I'm hoping you do.
I met a female once.
So let's kick it
They're
off.
Interesting creatures.
No, that they are. Let's kick it off with the diabetes and thyroid issues. How's the protocol? Is it any different with diabetes and thyroid issues, or is it basically the same?
With thyroid issues, not really. I mean, obviously, if people are on thyroxine, which is a medication because that they would take, the doctors prescribed it because they're producing low amounts of the hormones that are secreted from the thyroid, then you got to be careful. When the weight reduces, you got to decrease the dose of that medication. You'll know if that's, if anyone's ever worked with me, and there's been a few who have been on, those kind of medications and they've reduced the weight, when it needs to be down titrated because you get a little bit edgy. So I've had people who have had a thyroidectomy, they don't have a thyroid. I think the issue around hypothyroidism, when people think that they've gained the weight because their hormones are out of whack, and often they're thinking about their thyroid hormones. It's so rare. Hypothyroidism is it's so rare. It's not the cause for, I don't know, the vast majority of people who are overweight, particularly females. You gain the weight because you ate too much cake, unfortunately. So in that respect, or in that regard, then we can kind of move that to the side. Yes, it works with people with thyroid issues, exactly the same.
Diabetics?
What else? So diabetes. So there's two kinds of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, which is mostly an inherited autoimmune condition where the person's immune system destroys the pancreatic beta cells, the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. So they're the cells and the part of that organ, the pancreas, that's responsible for secreting insulin. So if your immune system destroys those cells, then you can't produce enough insulin to deal with the carbohydrate load when you ingest it. So then you need to exogenously inject, so that just means in an injection, inject insulin into your system to allow your body to regulate glucose metabolism.
Right.
So it's less than 10% of diabetics, something like that, right? And it's becoming less and less because the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is steadily increasing. So it's a huge issue. Type 2 diabetes is more a nutritional imbalance and lifestyle disorder.
Right.
So that's the majority of the issues. And So if we talk about type 2 diabetes, it's mostly due to the overconsumption of sugar. So we used to kind of bang on about it's due to inactivity. It's just not true. Exercise can make a difference, but it's nowhere near the kind of difference that can be made if one regulates their nutrient intake. So the average Australian consumes about 42 kilograms of sugar every year. So it's a lot. So we're overproducing insulin to handle the load of sugar and refined carbohydrates that we're eating. So you think about it, biscuits, cakes, cereals, bread, and then on top of that, you might think you're doing something healthy by eating lots of fruit and fruit juices, and you go to these juice bars and load up on this stuff that you think is really good for you, and it's doing way more damage. And then you're eating fried foods and root vegetables and what we call high glycemic index foods like carrots and peas and corn, and thinking, oh, I'm eating my vegetables, but that's just causing your blood sugar levels to rise dramatically. So then your pancreas has to keep secreting more insulin. Right.
That's
So
really interesting, because most people would think, like you just said then, I eat plenty of peas and carrots and corn, and I'm eating my veggies. And I mean, that's really a staple Aussie diet, really. That's the veg we used to eat when I was a kid growing up, was peas and corn or peas and carrots. they were the veg.
yes. Yeah, but then, years ago, when I say years ago, I mean many decades ago, those vegetables are fine if you're not overweight, if it's not also in the context of a lot of sugary drinks and snack type foods and chocolate bars and all these kinds of foodstuffs that are just so readily available, and people just unconsciously eat them throughout the day. Excessive amounts of dairy products and milk and cheese and yogurt, and we've all been brainwashed into thinking that we need to overconsume dairy to get our calcium levels up, and it's just not true. So where type 2 diabetes really comes about is, so if we take a step back from when the doctor diagnoses someone with type 2 diabetes, they've got what we call pre-diabetes.
Right.
And this is when you're not quite diabetic, but it's probable and almost certain that that's where you go, right? And you don't want type 2 diabetes. You really don't. A lot of people kind of, without understanding the disease, think, oh, it can be controlled with medication, or you can just handle it with diet and exercise. And yes, you can, but listen, you need a really, like the approach that, I utilize. It's a complete nutritional intervention. And I have to intervene in people's eating habits, lifestyle, understanding of food, understanding of their body, all of it. It's got to be totally immersive, and we've got to interrupt the sort of brain patterns that we've all developed over many years from just the way things are and advertising, and we all get addicted to these amazingly, super yummy foods that just aren't.
Even the health foods, it was my indulgence day on Sunday. And again, I was walking around Woolworths looking for something to eat that I wouldn't normally be eating during the week. And just walking down Woolworths haven't got a really big health food aisle like Coles have, but they've still got this little health food section with all these, smaller company, Joe and Bill's highly number one protein bar, or so-and-so's salted caramel balls that are in these little packets that are normally brown and really plain sort of packaging to make them look more, healthy. And every one of those labels was just like, I might as well just go eat a Mars bar. But they've got high protein written on them, or, low fat or whatever. But they're just chocked with the other one. If they say low sugar, they normally got high fat. If they got low fat, they normally got high sugar. It was amazing. I was thinking, it's astounding. Well, it's no wonder people get confused with what's good and what's not, when even the stuff that you're told's good on the labels and in the health food aisle just isn't.
Even that's called the health food aisle.
I know.
They should just put that label above the fresh produce.
Yeah, exactly right. Very true. That's true.
So then people don't know what to do with fresh produce. People just don't eat their vegetables. I mean, how many decades has it been we're trying to tell people to eat their vegetables? And it's like, why do we as a society even need convincing for that? That would be like creating a campaign called, imagine if the government spent millions of dollars trying to educate people to put petrol in their cars. It's just bizarre.
Well, I think, we've often talked about how the past, how you grew up and all that sort of thing, and what we learn along the way and decisions we made along the way, especially from a Western standpoint, because I see it with Lan's family and whatever. They don't really have that same, they're starting to with the newer kids, but especially like Lan's family and their kids. Growing up, you sort of condition, you leave dinner thinking that I have to eat that before I can eat that. So that must be awesome, and that must be rubbish, because I'm not allowed to have that until I eat that. And it's just, one of the things I loved about being on the first part of this protocol, and in general, what I got out of it was just how much that food is great. But your first thought that comes to your head is vegetables, sod that. I'd rather eat something that I like. But when you're actually eating them and they're cooked, they're done well, that's freaking fantastic. They taste great. But just as a kid, it was the last thing you ever wanted to do.
I mean,
to eat your ice cream. It's like the old Pink Floyd song.
Daughter,
how are you going to eat your pudding? You don't eat your dinner.
Mix some lettuce in the pudding. So, I mean, Winter, she's 8 now, and she can't get enough of lettuce and broccoli and asparagus and Brussels sprouts, and she loves all this stuff, and it's not like there's some magic about how, her mother and I raised her to eat her vegetables. It's literally, we just put it on the plate and didn't say anything about it. And it was just always there in front of her all the time. And you don't say anything. Other parents might say, oh, you got to eat your greens and come on, yum, 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 eat that green stuff. And as a kid, you're kind of testing the world and you're kind of examining things, and you're like, I'm not talking about the chicken like that. What's wrong with the green stuff? I'm not touching that. Right? So
tell me.
And they're just going to do what you do. I mean, kids think their parents are gods on legs. So if they observe the parents drinking soft drinks, Coca-Cola, all this sort of stuff, buying these sports drinks, Gatorade all the time from the service station every time they fill up, eating snack foods, potato crisps, biscuits, it's going in their lunch all the time. They're eating lollies, and it's all about surviving the struggle that life is until you can get through to that treat. I deserve that chocolate. Let's go have a milkshake. And it's just never ending. It's one thing after the other. And people are eating dessert all through the day just to survive the day. And however the day is occurring to them.
The whole reward thing as well. If you be good, I'll buy you. No one says that if you're really good, I'll buy you a celery stick. You want a celery stick? You better behave yourself.
Yeah. So let's go back. What are the consequences of type 2 diabetes that people just aren't really present to? So when you've got the issue of that disease in your body, you're at the risk of coronary artery disease, heart disease, heart attack, etc. Microvascular damage. So the smaller blood vessels in your body, which particularly in your kidneys and in your eyes, they get damaged. So 90% of patients on dialysis in renal wards are diabetics.
Mm.
So it's the leading cause of the need for dialysis. And that's not pretty. It's like, one of my good friends who passed away in 2015, his kidneys were shot and he was a diabetic, but he was on dialysis 3 times a week for 5 hours at a time.
Wow.
Having to go into the hospital 3 times a week for 6 hours on a machine and 5 hours on a machine. It's just not a nice thing to have to deal with.
Yeah.
You go blind, because of the microvascular damage in your eyes. People lose limbs. So my friend Pepe, he had lost his left leg just below the knee, half his right foot. You got to remember, the tissue in these peripheral areas like your feet, etc., become gangrenous. They die, and you got to amputate the toe, the next toe, the foot, the leg, because the blood vessels just don't provide enough blood flow and therefore nutrients and oxygenation to that tissue, and it dies. You get wounds that just won't heal. So he had a non-healing wound on his foot. If you go to places like the South Pacific, where obesity and therefore type 2 diabetes is rampant in the South Pacific, then you'll see in Fiji, for example, they've got the highest rate of type 2 diabetic related amputations in the world. So in Fiji, that little country, there's a diabetes related amputation every 12 hours.
Yeah. I think we spoke.
So the quality of life is dramatically impacted. There's the medication that one must be on. There's the alterations to your diet. There's the lethargy. There's the weight gain. There's so it's type 2 diabetes is something to be taken deadly seriously. And unfortunately, people just don't.
Yeah.
And the relationship between obesity and type 2 diabetes is like that, right? It's, you're fucked, basically.
Yeah.
And you can't rely on the medications that are out there, because there are medications that are designed to help sensitize, and I'll get into this in a moment, sensitize your tissue to insulin, because that's part of one of the mechanisms that leads to type 2 diabetes is your body stops responding to insulin.
Yeah.
So there are medications now that increase the sensitivity of that. But that can be problematic because you've got many tissues in your body that aren't insulin resistant. They remain very sensitive, right? So you've got other medications that increase the amount of insulin released from your pancreas. Right. Again, that can be problematic because of the insulin sensitive tissues. So how does this work? If you we used to think that the tissues in your body, like your muscle, your fat tissue, your liver, even your brain, become resistant to insulin. In other words, that hormone that signals those cells and tissues to do their job, they just stop responding to the insulin. Right. So then the pancreas has to release more insulin. That's what we used to think. What we now better understand is that the hypersecretion, so the excessive release of insulin from the pancreas, is what comes first. What causes that? People just eating too many carbohydrates throughout the day.
Yeah.
Right. And it's your blood sugar levels will go up. Your pancreas will release an appropriate amount of insulin to bring that down. If you're eating foods that are what we call have a high glycemic index, and therefore the glycemic load and the glycemic index is high. So if you're having a fruit juice, a sandwich, and a piece of fruit for lunch, you might think that's pretty good, but each slice of bread is the equivalent of 4 to 5 teaspoons of sugar. So you're going to increase your blood sugar levels dramatically. Your pancreas is going to go, whoa, and just release a huge amount of insulin to bring that down. What happens is it comes down too far. It's kind of like if you jump off a cliff into the water, the higher the cliff, the further under the water you'll go. So it brings it down too far. So about 3 hours after lunch, whether it be 3:30, 4 p.m., you're feeling really tired and irritable, and like you just want to sleep and you don't want to deal with it. You're not productive anymore. This is when, productivity in the workplace drops dramatically. People become really bad with each other, and you're just like on a mission. Your brain kicks into gear and it goes, get me some glucose, because now your blood sugar level's gone too low. So now you're on a mission to find that Tim Tam or have a sweet cup of tea with a biscuit. And you're like, get out of my way, find me the sugar, right? To bring it back up again. So people are on this kind of journey throughout the day, right? And constant is fantastic for the food industry. They've figured this stuff out, man. They know how to stimulate us to keep wanting to eat more, because what else did they convince us of is that when you're feeling tired, what picks you up is calorie-dense foods, sugary foods. Reach for that chocolate bar. That's what's going to, pick your energy up. Most of the time, it's you're just deficient in salt. You just need some salty water and down that.
Yeah, right.
That's how Gatorade came about, right? So there was a college football coach who realized that the game was won in those last few minutes, and he wanted to replenish the electrolytes that were lost. So he created this drink, right? Put some sweet stuff in there just to make it palatable. But everyone thinks it's the glucose. No, it's not. Maybe if you're a mountaineer climbing Mount Everest and you need those calories quickly, but that ain't you and I.
Funny you should say that. When I was a kid, my grandmother showed me something one day with sugar, and it was probably about the time when the food pyramid came out, and the base of that was just eat carbs, all grains and breads and pastas and rice and all that sort of stuff. And we were talking about it one night at dinner, and she said, it's funny because now I don't know how on the money this is, but it amazed me when I was that age. She said, it's amazing how they say sugar gives you energy, but try this experiment. And she'd say, put my arm out, and she'd try and push my arm down from, the outside, and I could pretty much hold her off the ground because she was only small. And she'd say, okay, now have a teaspoon of sugar and do it again. And literally my arm just went, I could not hold her up at all. It did my head in. I was like, what? It's out of control. She saw it on Ray Martin or something with one of those doctors, what's the doctor that used to be on Ray Martin that talks at 1,000,000 miles an hour?
I don't know.
I'm sure she saw it on one of those things, but it was really interesting.
Really? Wow.
We should
Maybe
try
your
it
arm was just fatigued.
I'm pretty sure we tried it with the other one.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, we should try it.
Wow. She's got some voodoo stuff.
Useless info.
She's hypnotized you.
Useless info. Just remind me.
So yeah, we eat too much sugar. We over-secrete insulin. And then that's when, because there's so much insulin, your muscle and fat tissue and liver stop responding to it.
Right.
So the hypersecretion of insulin comes first, and then insulin resistance starts to happen. So you've got, for example, one of the mechanisms on the cell membrane, you got these, we call them GLUT4 receptors, so glucose transporters. GLUT4 is the main one regulated by insulin. That was discovered by an Australian scientist, Professor David James, spent most of his career at the Garvan Institute. So he discovered the GLUT4 receptor, and that gets down regulated. So there's less of it on the cell surface. So then your cells can't take up that glucose. You need to take up that glucose because you can't have it just circulating in your blood in high concentrations for too long.
Right.
So then the pancreas has got, man, it's not happening. I have to increase the amount of insulin to get the job done. So this is like, if you're the head of the household, usually it's mum, and there's a demand on the household, and she's telling everyone in the household to kind of pick their game up and put your laundry away and clean your room and vacuum and come on, help out here. And that just after a while gets seen as nagging. And so you kind of get used to that level. Oh, there's just mum doing her thing again. And so you become desensitized to the nagging. That's what happens in your peripheral tissue. So what's mum's only option is to nag louder. And then you get used to that's the hypersecretion. That's more insulin being released from the pancreas. And at some point, mum goes, screw it. I'm just not going to say anything anymore. No one's listening anyway. She doesn't leave. She just doesn't do anything, stops saying anything, stops communicating, and stops working. Still there. That's what your pancreas will do. And so by the time a doctor diagnoses a patient with type 2 diabetes, they've lost 50% of their pancreatic beta cell function. So the beta cells are the cells in the pancreas that secrete insulin. That's when the GP will say, you're type 2 diabetic, we've got to put you on this medication called metformin. That's the first line pharmacological or drug therapy that you would get started on for a period of time, okay? Now, we used to think, once upon a time, that the beta cells died. That's why they weren't functioning anymore. And there's a scientist, clinician, who's head of endocrinology at Columbia University. He's also the founding research director of the Naomi Berry Diabetes Center in New York. He has published some great work where now it's not that the cells die, they turn back into a precursor state. So imagine a mother managing a household, husband, kids, all that sort of stuff. The workload and the responsibility, the accountability on that mother is great. Nothing compared to when she was single. Party girl, didn't have to be responsible for anything, whatever. People can handle their own garbage. I'm not your mother, right? So it's like the mum turned back into that state, that way of being. The beta cells in your pancreas revert back to an earlier precursor state where they no longer respond to glucose and they don't have to secrete the insulin.
Yeah, right.
They're not dead. They're just sort of semi-retired, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you can design a nutritional program that handles the three core mechanisms that cause the beta cells to revert back into a precursor state, they are glucose toxicity. So if you're consuming too much sugar, glucose, carbohydrates, which all gets converted to glucose, it's toxic. So if you give the body a break from all glucose toxicity, and if you reduce your oxidative damage, so for example, free radical damage, it's like when you cut an apple in half and it goes brown, that's oxidation. That's the free radicals from the air causing it to oxidize. That happens in our body as well, like the rusting effect. So if you've got too much insulin, that increases triglycerides in your blood as well. So if you go to the doctor and get your blood work checked, they'll check for cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and your triglycerides. and your triglycerides are often increased if you are hyperinsulinemic. So that causes a lot of oxidative damage, as does inflammation. So if you've got high insulin, insulin is pro-inflammatory. So people are beginning to understand that inflammation can cause a lot of tissue damage, accelerated aging, we call it inflammaging, and can prevent your body from healing, right? So there's a lot of people out there interested in how can I reduce the inflammation in my body, and they're taking copious amounts of curcumin and all these antioxidants and fish oil and all this sort of stuff. No, just cut carbohydrates out of your diet for a period of time, right? That's because if you bring the insulin down by stopping the glucose toxicity, inflammation will plummet, right? So if you handle those three things, there is the possibility that those pancreatic beta cells will redifferentiate or turn back into the cell that they're supposed to be, which does respond to glucose and does appropriately secrete insulin.
Right.
In addition, now you've got the tissue, your muscle, your fat tissue, your liver, so hepatic tissue, even your brain and the pancreas as well become insulin resistant. We give them a break and we give the body great nutrition for a period of time. They can resensitize to the insulin. So they start working properly again.
Right.
So that's how type 2 diabetes comes about. That's how it can be reversed, or at least the damage done can be mitigated to whatever degree. We even see patients that have progressed to insulin injections, having to inject themselves every day with insulin, coming off those injections, or significantly reducing the dose. What does that tell you? Well, their body must be secreting insulin properly again, and B, responding to its own insulin appropriately. So this is a big deal. Gone unchecked, what happens? If you're secreting too much insulin in that pre-diabetic state, in females, so you mentioned polycystic ovary syndrome, so PCOS, when women are hyperinsulinemic, the excess insulin causes their dysfunction in their ovaries, where their ovaries now start secreting testosterone.
Right.
Okay. So it messes with what we call androgen metabolism. So this too is it's an issue of hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance. That's why a lot of PCOS patients, the gynecologist or even the GP will prescribe metformin, which is an anti-diabetic drug, or some of these other insulin sensitizers to help with that. This can cause, PCOS can be the cause of infertility issues as well. So there's been a number of women who just handled their general health and well-being, restored insulin sensitivity, lost the weight, obviously, because insulin's the hormone that causes us to gain weight and also prevents us from losing weight. So if you can rebalance that kind of hormonal axis, weight falls off, your biochemistry restores, and that androgen dysregulation in the ovaries can normalize, and fertility can improve, especially women, younger women who have fertility issues. They have a lot of estrogen locked up in their fat tissue. So when they go on this kind of weight loss program, that estrogen gets released. Some younger women will ovulate twice a month, become highly, highly fertile. We got to tell them, unless you want to get pregnant, your partner's got to wear a condom, because even if you're on the oral contraceptive pill, it won't do the job. Like, you're highly likely to still get pregnant.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And is it the same with the heart disease and the diabetic correlation as well? Because I think before you've said if you've had a heart attack, there's a good chance you're going to become a diabetic as well, isn't there?
That's right.
So does it work
Yeah.
the same with the PCOS and diabetes as well?
Yeah. So with heart disease, there's a number of different mechanisms at play. Underneath it all is, again, a hyper secretion of insulin.
Yeah.
So the insulin causes an increase of a growth factor called VEGF, so vascular endothelial growth factor. This causes the smooth muscle around your blood vessels to increase. So it stimulates the growth of those cells. And that will decrease the size of the lumen of your blood vessels.
Right.
And it decreases the elasticity of the blood vessels as well. So it causes the stiffening of the arteries. Not only that, so you get decreased blood vessel volume and they become more stiff. So this is going to increase blood pressure, make the heart have to work harder. Not only that, but insulin causes your kidneys, which are another organ that's very sensitive to insulin. The kidneys are like one of the last organs to desensitize to insulin. So whilst your muscle and fat tissue and liver become insulin resistant, so then your pancreas increases insulin, your kidneys remain very sensitive to the now increased amount of insulin. What does insulin do to your kidneys? It causes them to retain a lot of sodium.
Right.
And with that fluid, so it increases renal kidney hypertension. So the pressure in your kidneys increases as well. So that further increases blood pressure. So, if you present to your doctor and they tell you you've got high blood pressure, they might tell you to reduce your salt intake. So the salt, for the most part, is really only dangerous in a background context of high insulin caused by the excessive consumption of carbohydrates and in particular sugar.
Right.
Okay. So if you've got the decreased lumen volume, the stiffening of your blood vessels and arteries in particular, you've got the renal hypertension further driving up blood pressure. This is a massive risk factor for heart disease. And that's why what you mentioned, the food pyramid that the USDA released in 1992, where carbohydrates were pushed to the bottom. Food lobbyists kind of caused that. So if your food stuffs were towards the bottom of the food pyramid, then you make more money, right? Because
92?
92.
You sure?
Yeah, pretty
I
certain.
finished school in 89 and I learned about that in school.
Yeah.
I might be losing my mind. I'm getting old,
Yeah. So, what happened was we cut fat out of the diet and carbohydrates went down the bottom. So all these foods came out low fat and, like you said earlier, bulked out with, sugar and fructose and all this sort of stuff to make it taste better and palatable. And we get addicted to that stuff. So then we eat more of it. And heart disease went like this.
Yeah.
Right. So everyone was like, what the heck? Maybe it's not, fat was not the culprit. No, sugar's the culprit. And fat is the accomplice, right? Because then if you eat sugar and fat together, donuts, cheese on bread, chocolate, most dairy products, right? Ice cream and all that sort of stuff.
That's something I haven't had in ages. Grilled cheese on toast. Now you've made me hungry.
It's so addictive. And deep fried potato, right? You got the carbs and the fat. And deep fried potato is really bad because then you have the salt on it as well, right? So look, humanity, I said this, I wrote it somewhere in 1995. I've got the exercise book somewhere. I wrote that the downfall of humanity will be either because some kind of viral infection, right? Which is we're in the middle of a pandemic, or deep fried potato? I think it's going to be both. I think deep fried potato and everything that like is like that, cake and ice cream and
If
everything.
anything hits the news in the next week on deep fried potatoes and some health epidemic, the conspiracy theorists are going to go
It's
nuts.
just the
They knew it was
overconsumption of
coming. He wrote it
carbs
in
and
94.
fat and sugar. Yeah. And, we all got to, we came off the boob after being breastfed, and they kept feeding us dairy. So our brains never appropriately rewired to being a grown-up, eating grown-up food. And we remained addicted to that sugar-fat combination, which is not found in nature other than a couple of fruits and breast milk, really. You don't see carbs and fat together in nature. So anyway, that aside, that's how these diseases come about. It's a huge issue. And when people overconsume a lot of calories as well, with the insulin, it's very easy to gain weight. The body was designed to put fat on, right? So then when you've got all that fat, particularly in your internal organs, the fat around your liver and the fat around your pancreas, then that dramatically increases the speed with which you will develop type 2 diabetes and heart disease and be victim to stroke and have neurological degenerative disorders like dementia. And also insulin, as I said, it increases the growth of insulin increases vascular endothelial growth factor. It also increases a number of other growth factors, and itself stimulates cells to multiply, to grow. So if you've got precancerous cells in your body and you eat a lot of carbohydrates and glucose, and you feed the cancer with the glucose and you're stimulating their growth with the insulin, that's why obesity is such a risk factor for many cancers. So this needs to be handled appropriately. It needs to be dealt with seriously. Don't be overly dramatic and significant about it. Just act. Just, people just need to do what's appropriate to, if you're overweight, lose the weight. However you do it, whether you contact me and let us help you or not, but do something, cut the sugar out, stop consuming so much dairy and grains, refined carbohydrates, get adequate sleep and drink water and eat those vegetables, bulk your gut out with good quality, fresh produce. And I think that's a great idea, taking that health food aisle sign and putting it above the fresh produce.
Exactly right.
I think that's what they did with soy milk and these kind of like milk alternatives, is they put them next to the milk in the fridge. They don't need to be there, but people started buying them then. So a lot of positive changes could be made with some really smart thinking on behalf of the producers of these foodstuffs and how they're sold to us. But really what's going to make the biggest difference for health outcomes in greater society is the health consumer themselves being accountable for their own well-being. And you got to take a stand for your own health and take the appropriate grown-up actions that are required to restore it if it's out. So that's what I make myself available for, and that's why I created Simpler Health, to make high-end science accessible and available for people to handle their health once and for all and get on with living the life that they really want.
Cool. On a last note, as we've said before, covered before, I'm on phase 4 now, permanently, which has been great. And one of the things James and a couple of other people are coming out onto phase 4 this week, I think. I think James starts yesterday. And there's a whole heap of different sort of concerns, I suppose, about being on that phase. One is I'm just scared of putting it all back on again. And two is And something I found as well, it doesn't take much for you to feel like you've put a lot of weight back on, even though you know it's physically impossible to put that much weight on in that limited time. But it's one of the great things about the protocol as well, is that if you're ever worried about, is it going to revert, am I going to revert back to how I was before I started? It's like it would be actually take a lot of effort to do that, because a couple of weeks and you start thinking, I just don't feel as sharp anymore, because you've reintroduced a bit of carbs and a bit of, normal foods and whatever, and you have your indulgence day, and you just feel like you're bloated and swollen again. And what's great is you've got that phase 1 to go, bang, I'm going to hit that for a week and just pull everything back into, and then just carry on again as normal. It's fantastic. But I know a couple of people are concerned of, what's going to happen in phase 4. I can't wait to go nuts and eat whatever I want, but I'm scared I'm going to go back to how I was before. Really hard to do, I think. That's what's great about this whole thing.
Yeah, for people, see that there is that concern, makes all the difference. And what people have to realize, physiologically, you're not in the same you're not in the same state of hormonal imbalance that you were previously. So your body can better handle those nutrients now, and those indulgences. Not only that, you've had an experience of what it likes to feel extraordinary and have your body just perform optimally. And, and like you said, you do notice it when you eat. Now, that's not to say that this protocol is a vaccine against obesity. It does take being responsible ongoingly over time. So that's why we have phase 4 to manage, not manage people about that 12-month period until responsible for your own well-being. You can be trusted with your body long term. And that takes time. It takes time to develop those.
Sorry, we just had a technical issue then.
What was I saying?
So we're talking about phase 4 and maintaining that managing over 12 months is what you were saying.
Yeah, that's right. So whatever it takes to give your word to a target and act appropriate over whatever time period that takes to lose all the weight, you become a different human being. You learn a lot. So it's not the same person that was there before. Having said that, it's not a vaccine against obesity. So you do have to learn now to be responsible for this healthy body moving forward. So phase 4, I coach people through, you've got to learn how to put in the intellectual effort to manage yourself. It takes a bit of discipline over a period of time. Exercise becomes more important. In fact, it's critical during phase 4. So you've got to develop those habits around being active. But having said that,
it's going to the gym and training your butt off, or walking, or like, what are you talking about?
Look, whatever floats your boat, rubs your Buddha, whatever. I mean, I like functional activities. If you can just incorporate more activity in the day-to-day living of your life, get up to something different. I mean, if the only exercise or activity that you get is an hour or whatever it is that you spend in the gym, what else are you doing with your life? Like, get up to something, be a bit more active with other things, have way more sex and go, do stuff that just causes you to act.
Sold,
right? And it's great. You need it, right? And you can just walk, collect your thoughts, be good to yourself in that regard. But it's phase 4 is very much like like if you're flying a plane from here to another country, to LA, for example, the plane is almost always off course. And it's the pilot's job to kind of keep steering it back on course. And it's amazing. It's almost always off course, yet they land it where it's supposed to go. Pretty much every single time, right? And that's kind of what you learn during phase 4, is to be the pilot of this machine. This highly sophisticated, now calibrated instrument, and you learn to, you know, you've got your hands on the levers and dials now. And if it does go a bit, you know, if you go on a holiday, you indulge or whatever, you put on a kilo or two, you've got the experience of phase one to be able to correct that immediately. And I don't mind when people's weight goes up a little bit and then they correct it. So then they develop the confidence in that, oh, wow, I can do that. I have phase one in my armory now.
Mm.
And, you know, and then after phase four, it's not forever, you know, it's 12 months. And then, you know, you go be responsible. But now there's no mystery to how your body feels, looks, the shape of you or whatever. You know, you can handle it. People come back every year or two and do what I call a tune-up, which might be, you know, 2 or 3 weeks in phase one, 1 week in phase three, and then you're done. But yeah, it's like your body now preferentially will burn fat rather than the carbohydrates that you have to keep feeding it. You're constantly hungry all the time. We deal with all of that. So yeah, nothing to be afraid of.
It's actually great. Yeah. So the guys that are hitting that this week, enjoy. I'm going to see a couple of you at a gig I'm doing on Sunday at the Marsden Brew House on Father's Day. A couple of them are coming out there to have their first indulgence day at the pub.
I might come. What's that? Marsden Brew House?
Marsden Park. Yeah.
How far is that from me?
Oh, it wouldn't be that far from you, really, because you just come down one of the M's or F's, freeways or motorways or whatever. It's at Marsden Park's out near Rouse Hill, Blacktown Way.
Oh, geez.
That sort of area. So it wouldn't be that. It'd be as far to my place as it would be to Marsden Park for you. Just
that's far.
Different way.
I don't travel that far. Gigs closer to me.
I've got a heap of stuff here you've lent me where you've travelled me. I've got to give back to you. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Good luck to you guys that are hitting phase 4 this week. Any other questions? I hope we covered that for you, Joe. Put them in the comments below. Enjoy the outro. And we'll see you again next week. See you guys.
Bye, guys.